Yo, what is up everyone? Back here with another video. Today, we're going to be doing a video pretty much talking about all the teams that I think will be relevant going into regionals. So obviously we're getting really close to regional times. I mean, Australian regionals coming up this next weekend, so gonna be kind of nuts, you know? It should be in a few days from this video, right? Because this video should be going up on Wednesday. Yeah, no, it's super exciting. So I wanted to kind of cover all the teams that I thought were relevant, what you probably would want to be prepared for if you're going to Brisbane. I mean, that's this weekend, right? If you're going to Salt Lake, it's the weekend after, and then if you're in Europe, then it'll be the week after that, right? So pretty coming like pretty soon, right? Now, the first thing to touch on, I guess, would be pretty much going through the teams, you know, all the way down, right? So we're gonna start from what's it called, the most recent tournament, which is the Victory Road February 12th challenge, and we're gonna go to the other earlier Victory Road tournament. We're gonna talk about that. Actually, let's do it in order. I'm gonna reorganize this into progression of the metagame kind of direction, right? And yeah, we'll kind of have this here. Okay, so let's start out with Victory Road. So when we first started playing this format, like obviously there were a bit earlier builds and like some stuff that definitely was still waiting to be optimized. I think one thing that has changed substantially from like now, and which will like be good to keep in mind, especially when it comes to regionals, is you probably want to stray away from the early Tornogre variants and the early, or not the early Tornogre, but like the early screens variants and the early what's it called, like team that won, right? I mean, Whimsicott and Ogre still has like some potential, but like I would definitely think this would need to be like updated a little bit to continue to be consistent, right? That being said, I do think there are a couple builds here that are kind of standouts that will carry over in terms of viability. So the first one that I'd like to highlight that I really think stands out in terms of viability, this was built all the way back then, is the Charizard Calyrex team. I still think this team does incredibly well into the metagame, might need some tweaks, but for the most part, I think this team is incredibly solid and definitely worth looking into for a regional, right? I actually think this is one of the stronger builds of the kind of early metagame that was formed and will still carry over even then. So definitely would take a look at this, and I would definitely keep it, keep it in mind. So I think that would be pretty solid overall, right? So yeah, I mean, you have Fast Wisp, you have like Charizard. Obviously, Charizards now should be running Lum, and then you probably want Solar Beam over like Heat Wave, right? But for the most part, like the teams, as I said, like mostly stay the same, just a couple of tweaks, right? So that's one of the teams that I would definitely highlight. I mean, as we continue down, we see like some other builds, mostly Zacian Ogre builds. Zacian Ogre builds have kind of progressed past Seismitoad at this point, so I would start looking into other builds that aren't Zacian Seismitoad. That being said, like obviously, there are a lot of different builds. I would even say the build that Sohab used here was like still semi-relevant, so like something like this could still be fine, right? Then we go down. And we look at Limitless. So what I wanted to look at was some of the Zacian Ogre teams that ended up winning some tournaments early in the format or doing well in them. So the first team I want to talk about that ended up winning is actually Hippolyte's team that he used. Pretty standard suited like for the current metagame. You can kind of see the progression of Zacian Ogre. Started out a bit more offensive. That's what won, and there was a screens version as well, and now screens is kind of turned into a more defensive archetype with Zapdos and then Mungus, right? So pretty much these teams started teching a grass type to deal with the resurgence of Gastrodon. Pretty much like Gastrodon started popping up everywhere, right? This just gave you ways to deal with it that weren't necessarily reliant on that stuff, right? Or weren't reliant on like just out damaging it. Basically, you have something that can directly kill it, even if like it's kind of set up, right? So that's like worth going. And then you go down then you go down to Jesus' team, right? Pretty much here you can see that like this has Venusaur. So these teams basically had like a really similar idea to what was the popular version, or like what would be the popular version at the time, right? And then you ended up seeing that what's it called? Venusaur ended up turning in the Rillaboom later on, right? But like the grass type was always there. So it's Kyogre, Zacian, Grimmsnarl, Zapdos, Incineroar grass type. And this one was using safety goggles, but now I'd say that the Life Orb set is kind of kind of risen up as like the better set out of the bunch. So then besides that, I mean, there's some other smaller wins that have popped up. I think this seems private, isn't it? Yeah, man, this seems private. Oh, anyways, but yeah, so like you kind of get the idea, right? Like those were the main Zacian Ogre teams I think really succeeded. and did pretty well. Then we look at the Yveltal Zacian builds. So Yveltal Zacian has evolved a lot. So I wanted to touch on this one. This ended up getting second at, what's it called? Francesco Pardini's Battle Dome, which I played in as well. I ended up getting top 4 with this, with a different version of this as well. So yeah, obviously Colossal Yveltal Zacian is still around. I would say that it is starting to fall out of favorability with the meta, mostly because of like all the teams that exist. That being said, I still think it is like a choice that you can bring. The problem is like in close sheet 2, you can kind of get like messed up a bit. So, you definitely have some troublesome matchups there to deal with. Then you come down here, you can see that I finished 4th with another version of the team. Would I personally recommend this for regional? Probably not. It was alright, because remember we locked in like early on in the metagame, right? This was like a month ago, I think, whether we locked in. And, I mean, it's alright. I think Torkoal has some potential. Venusaur felt, like, really lackluster on the team, which isn't too surprising, granted, like, how it kind of fell off anyways. And then you have, obviously, like, Zacian and Yveltal. Yveltal with Assault Vest was fine on this team specifically, but I think definitely the Life Orb set's picking up more now. But yeah, definitely, like, AV was kind of cool here, right? Then we go over to the team that I won Limitless with. As I said, like it has progressed a lot. So like even the screens version of this team, I would recommend changing Rotom to like maybe Regieleki. The only thing that's tricky with that is then you do have a worse Calyrex matchup for it, right? So you're never really going to get like a perfect matchup from anything. There's always going to be something you have trouble with, right? That being said, I think that you can make smart variations to these teams to like kind of improve them, but yeah, you'll notice too, I was using Recover Gastro at the time. Protect might be a bit better now just because of all the Rillaboom in the metagame and the resurgence of that. Really depends, right? But like you'll notice that like these builds kind of progressed along with the metagame, right? Like again, Assault Vest Yveltal, like at the time, Life Orb wasn't really being used that much. So just kind of something to consider, right? So that's kind of it for the Yveltal Zacian archetype. Then we go down Shadow Rider Calyrex, right? It's had a really good amount of performances. Taboo's won twice with it, right? So Taboo won like basically with the same team, by the way. He won Francesco Pardini's like Battle Dome, and then he won, the Penguin Fundraiser Cup. So he won 2 in a row with this team. You'll notice they changed the Snarl on the next variation, right? For the most part, the team remained the same, right? That was pretty much it. Not too many changes in between. That being said, this might be a worthwhile consideration since it did do the best. And then you have the more offensive version of these teams. I would say for like these versions of the teams right now, they're a little more biased towards Whimsicott, Zacian, Calyrex, Shadow, Thundurus, Incineroar, Ditto, or like Rillaboom, Ditto. Kind of depends, right? Like those teams kind of fit as well. So just stuff to keep in mind there, right? Then we go back. Pokezation, I'm just going to talk about that when we get to the section. Groudonzation, I'm also going to talk about when we get to the section. These Groudonzation teams are really outdated. And I kept saying back then that I thought that there was a really good build for this archetype. People just need to find it, and like finally people found it, right? Same with a lot of these archetypes. I mean, even you can notice like Shadow Rider Calyrex, like the only other one variant was basically just the same team, except that it was running like Safety Goggles Zapdos, right? But I don't think that that's necessarily better than Thunder's version, so worth keeping in mind there. Then we go over to MPA. So the reason why I wanted to talk about MPA is because MPA has a lot of different statistics, so we can kind of take a look at all the teams that were used there, kind of track the trends over the previous few weeks, right? So you'll notice here, this was back when I saw the old version of the team. We both, me and Feist both use Zacian Ogre. Standard Zacian Ogre team. I would say this is when the metagame was still a bit outdated, so I wouldn't necessarily take this specific week into consideration with most teams. There were like maybe a couple of okay teams, but for the most part, I would say not so much, right? Continue down. Not really too much of interest. But then we go into week 2, and this is where you start to see a little bit more of a metagame formation, right? You see me, I use a team that I used to, win Victory Road. I ended up losing to Snow, and Snow was using the Sun team that's been popping up like crazy now, right? Axior used a Tornogre team, which ended up, doing really well. Jones using his Calyrex Shadow team. So now you can notice a kind of trend forming, right, between these Sun teams, stuff like that. People are recognizing, like, how good this stuff is, Then we continue down, let's go down further. Over here, you'll notice these Calyrex Shadow teams are now starting to pick up different, partners. So, like, here you'll notice, like, Landorus is starting to pop up next to, Calyrex Shadow and Zacian. So this is kind of a cool combination. You'll notice, obviously, here, same Sun teams that are popping up. So it's definitely been seeing a lot more play now. It's been gaining a lot of popularity. Like, there's a huge amount of usage for these teams. And you can kind of see that trend. There is a decent amount of Colossal as well, but for the most part, like, I wouldn't be too worried about it, you know. I haven't seen too much of it, but yeah. Like, you'll notice, like, there are some Zacian Ogre teams that are kind of filling in the trend, but for the most part, right, it's mostly kind of those Sun teams, Zacian Ogre, and then a few other things, right? And then we go down here. Yeah, I mean, for the most part, right, we've literally just looked at, like, a bunch of Sun teams in a row. Like, you can really see the metagame forming. Then we go to week 3. We saw a bit of a variation, actually. So the Sun team was really popular. On my team, I mean, Yveltal Zacian was pretty dominant, right? We had Yveltal Zacian here, Yveltal Zacian here, Yveltal Zacian here, Yveltal Zacian here. All the same version. This is the version that Snow used as well this week. And then we have my version with, like, Regieleki and Zacian, right? So you'll notice that Yveltal Zacian, I mean, it had a decent amount of play this week, right? Mostly on our end, but yeah. Then we go here, right? We go down, you can see, like, you know, these Zacian Ogre teams are starting to get played more. The one that I won with, also the, you know, Tailwind Zacian Ogre teams. So they just kind of pop up once in a while. It's just important to keep in mind, you know. You'll notice the kind of trends here. Maybe, like, 1 or 2 Pokemon change out. You'll see, like, these Tailwind teams as well pop up. But for the most part, right, it's pretty straightforward how they're being approached, you know. So pretty much we've seen a meta formation of, like, Zacian Ogre Zapdos, the Sun team, Yveltal Zacian, stuff like that. You know, there's a lot of different variations of teams. And then you see, like, usually the Palkia stuff is pretty, like this, I would say this is actually the most optimal 6 of Palkia you could have. Even though, like, this was a 2-0, this is probably the most optimal 6 for Palkia you could have, at least at the moment, right? Continue down, you know, you'll see, like, these these trends kind of, like, carry over, you know. Still Sun is around, you know, you'll still see certain other teams, Zacian Ogre, this other Zacian Ogre variant with Persian, you know, a lot of different cool teams, and, like, the Tornogre variant over here, right? So you can kind of notice a couple teams being popularized. I could definitely see some changes being made to certain archetypes over time, right? And, like, Yveltal Zacian is one of those. You've seen, like, the bias going away from Assault Vest Yveltal and going to Layforb Yveltal, and, like, using double intimidate, stuff like that. So really interesting meta progressions there, right? And then finally, you know, last round here, like, for the most part, like, kind of teams you would expect. Paul was using a team that was also used, I believe, by a Japanese player as well. And then you kind of notice the same stuff over and over again, right? So nothing too crazy there, I'd say, for the most part. Overall, it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it for the NPA. And then finally, we'll go to Victory Road because this is the most recent big tournament we've had, and it'll probably be the last one before we really, like, you know, have regionals, right? So over here, you know, we'll see that I ended up winning with Zacian Ogre, right? You'll notice that some teams were really a big part of the trend. There was a kind of a stray Colossal here and a stray Calyrex Shadow Groudon, as I mentioned, 2 really strong teams. Palkia Zacian as well. I think this has some potential. Probably not the Ditto slot. I think the Ditto is not so great. But you'll notice a lot of different Tornogre variants. And then, you know, obviously Zacian Ogre with screens, right? So you can kind of see the variations there that are popping up. Overall, kind of cool options. And then the Sun teams, right? At this point, the Yveltal Zacian team that's been really popularized with, like, Layforb Yveltal wasn't really too relevant. So that's something that I would maybe consider being an aspect of the regional, right? But yeah, that's pretty much what I would say overall. But yep, that's pretty much it for the overall review of all the teams and summaries and everything. Just wanted to give you guys my quick updates and, like, thoughts on the metagame, especially for those of you who are going to regionals this weekend from Australia. Those of you who are not in Australia and going into Salt Lake, yeah, I mean, this will still be useful, right? But yeah. Once again, guys, thank you so much for all the support. I incredibly appreciate it. If you guys would like to support me beyond to YouTube, please make sure to check out a Patreon where you guys can, you know, support me. And also make sure to check out coaching where you guys can pay and improve your own skills. You know, get an hour with me, or as many hours as you want, I guess, and just improve your skills, you know, and work with me. So, yeah. It's a really good experience. I've been doing a lot of coaching lately, and honestly, it's been really nice working with a lot of people, especially before regionals and stuff, because it's, like, you know, it's really nice to just, like, help people, like, kind of find their success. So it's just nice in that regard. But yeah, also too, we'll have the IC this weekend. I'm probably going to look at that as well in terms of, like, usage and stuff, and I will be playing in that. So make sure to check out the Twitch if you guys would like to. But yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. Again, thank you for all the support. Incredibly appreciate it. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.